Welcome to the Photo Banter podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gagne, and on today's podcast, I speak with photographer Gregory Crewdson. Gregory Crewdson studied photography at SUNY Purchase and the Yale University School of Art, where he is now the director of studies in photography. He has exhibited his work around the world and published several books of his photography. Much of his work takes place in small town America and specifically in the western Massachusetts area. Gregory spends years scouting and producing large-scale productions that look very cinematic in style. He has cited films such as Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, as well as David Lynch's Blue Velvet as inspirations to his work. Gregory's attention to detail and storytelling ability is something that has intrigued me for years, so I was really excited to get a chance to speak with him and hear about how he pulls off these massive productions. So I hope you enjoy, and thanks so much for listening. All right, I now welcome on Gregory Crewdson. Gregory, it's been a crazy year, man, for everybody. How are you kind of hanging in there with this work life? How's this year kind of been for you, I guess?
I mean, like for all of us, it's been really a challenge, and it's a time to reflect and it's a chaotic world, and I believe that we all, in one way or another, turn to art, whether it's photography or movies or literature or whatever it is, to try to establish some kind of order or stability in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And what have you kind of been doing with your time? Like, have you still been inspired to create work, or what have you kind of been doing the last 9 months, I guess, with everything going on?
Well, the main thing that we've been working on was, in a very challenging way, is, I had a body of work, an eclipse of moths, that we actually made about 2 years ago, but was scheduled to open during this period. And of course, when we made the pictures, we couldn't have imagined we all be in this circumstance. And so we've been challenged by the idea or the conception of getting this work out there, but also thinking outside of the box in terms of having an audience that is not confined just to gallery spaces.
Yeah, because I've had some I went online, some galleries been doing virtual shows and stuff like that. It's obviously way different. It's a completely different experience. Is that something you guys have been playing around with, or even have any interest in doing that during this time period, I guess?
Well, I think photography, if you take a step back and think even before the pandemic, photographers, I think, have been in a very complicated relationship to the medium in terms of the understanding that, on one hand, the audience photography has never been bigger.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other, 99.9% of the population experience photographs through screens.
Yep.
Through Instagram or other social media or computer screens. So those of us who believe in the idea that photographs as a physical object that hangs on a wall, that has certain kind of permanence, we have to understand that a very small percentage of the world experiences pictures in that way. Most people experience pictures as a disposable mirage in a certain way, as a kind of way of evidencing that your life is um, is good and and um, evidence of like your own standing and your own position in in the larger society. So we're already in a kind of weirdly diminished space in terms of like those of us who have a kind of belief in the idea that pictures can move us in one way or another.
Yeah. And like you're saying, like it's a different world we're living in now, and the way people view their pictures is completely different. And I was just kind of interested to get your perspective, because like with Instagram, you have a decent sized following on there, and like I was just kind of reading through comments, and people really love your work and respond to it. But it's really interesting because you spent all these years like spending all these times building these big productions, and I know you spent years shooting 8x10. I don't know if you shoot 8x10 anymore, but yeah, but then like it goes onto a screen that's like 2 inches 2 inches wide. Like, how do you kind of view like Instagram and social media? Like, is it just kind of a thing you have to do now as a business, or like how do you kind of view it, like you said, because so many people, that's where they see people's work now?
Well, I think you have to look at it in two different ways. I think on one level, no one could ever mistake
Mhm.
social media for, in terms of, you know, an artist's work as the thing itself.
Yeah.
But on the other level, it's like, particularly now, it's like the currency of our culture. And it is a way, in the end, we all make art in a way to communicate something. So like if, um, so I think that like, it's not useful to like, um, not acknowledge the existence, but maybe try to work with it. The pictures themselves, though, the physical objects that hang in galleries and museums are the thing, you
Yeah.
know. But even in an ideal situation, I would say a fraction of the world sees it that way. Um, so like anything, it has its, you know, positives and negatives, and you know, photographers, art photographers in general, have a very strange um, kind of um, relationship to the medium, in that photography is the currency of our culture. We all understand our and know how to read pictures, and we read thousands of them each day.
Hmm.
That's not the case for like a painting or sculpture or video, you know, installation. Or so the challenge is to like use that democratic language in a way that like um, could connect to people, and also, but also at the same time, the struggle is to make a way of making pictures that feels subjective and um, that reveals a, a vision of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess one more question on that, the social media aspect, is because it must be interesting because we live in a time where, like for instance, the way I contacted you through your producer was just
Yeah.
through Instagram, direct message, and you go on your Instagram, you get hundreds of comments on your photos you post. Like, do you do you do you enjoy the feedback? Do you ever learn anything from it? Do you ignore it? Because it is an interesting time. Like before social media, the only way I guess you would get an opinion about art or something is like reading some like art critic or something. But now it's like your your fans, or whatever you want to call them, people that enjoy your work, they have a direct access to you and can comment on every piece of artwork you put out there on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like anything, a double-edged sword. But you know, if I keep going back to the idea that like we all, at the core of it, want to communicate something, you know,
Hmm.
like in the end, like I sort of call myself a storyteller.
Hmm.
And you know, photography is like limited in terms of any story it can tell, but like in terms of the fact that it's frozen and still in time, but the audience or the viewership needs to complete the story, you know. So there needs to be a transaction at the end between the maker and the viewer.
Mm.
So and I think every artist strives to have that.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, definitely. Because like I went to photo school. I know you teach at Yale now
Yeah.
in the photo department. And at least for me, when I was in photo school, a big part of the program was like, you know, whatever it was, every week or every month, you had a critique and you had to show your work, and there was like people talk about it. For you, obviously, you've accomplished a lot and had a lot of success in photography. But even at this point in your career, do you find it necessary to get opinions from, I don't know, maybe the people that work with you, or just getting feedback on the work you're doing now? Or like, how do you kind of view that aspect of the process, I guess?
Well, I tend to actually be very private about like my work when I'm in the process of making it. Very few people see it.
Yeah.
I mean, when we're making work, you know, we work with a large scale crew, and, you know, there's a lot of people involved. So that's fairly public. But when we're in the post production aspect, you know, I'm working very closely with my printer, and Julianne, my partner and producer, and myself. That's basically it. So one of the reasons I think for that is that it's important during that period to like maintain ownership of the pictures. And once they go out in the world, in terms of exhibition,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, distributed in magazines or on social media, whatever, you kind of have to give them up. You kind of lose the ownership of them. So they become part of the more public domain.
Yeah.
So I really value the time, the months, and sometimes years where we're working on these things in the studio, because like, you know, like I think all artists, there's a combination, all of us have it, of like both feeling like a combination of like, you know, feeling sort of, you know, there's a streak of narcissism that like everything you make is great. But at the very same time, there's huge doubt,
Yeah.
you know, so like you don't want to be thrown off by, at that early stage of like your own belief in the work, because if you don't believe in the work, there's no one else that's going to um, believe in it. You know, first and foremost, you have to like, because you're willing it into life, and you have to believe that what you're doing is important.
Yeah. And with like the, because like a lot of your work, it is like these big productions, and you spend years on it like you do. Is there ever like a point where you're just like, you're like halfway in it and you're like, man, this ain't working, like we spent all this time, and then you're in this position where we got all the crew, we got the location, we got the lights, and then it's because like, as you know, like you can think of a project in your mind as much as you want and plan it out, but then like the day of the shoot, like it might just be completely different. How do you kind of deal with those situations if they do even pop up?
It's part of the process, you
Yeah.
know. Photography is, you know, is there's an element of failure um, in the fact that um, there's an element of failure in every, you know, in every picture that you make, because it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's so many different ways it could go wrong, or that photography can fail you. So I and then at the end of the day, either a picture works or it doesn't. But it never, ever is what you imagined it to be.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Like you have a clear and concise understanding of what you think the picture is going to be, and then it becomes something else. You know, it always becomes something other than what you imagine. There are so many things that happen in terms of weather and lighting and other things that just are outside of your grasp.
Yeah, and one of the sticks out for me in the documentary, I think came out in 2012.
Yeah.
It was one of your famous pictures, Brief Encounters, where you guys shut down this entire street and spent like a long time like lighting it, and then it's almost right before you're about to shoot, like a giant truck just drives through the snow.
Yeah. Well, it's the paradox there was the giant truck was there to like came late to turn off the street lamps, which we need turned off. So it was necessary that they came in there.
Yeah.
But then they left marks all over, like tracks all over the street. And of course, we did our best to cover them up, and then we've corrected as much as we could in post-production. But those things just happen. That's just like part of, I mean, the positive of that like experience was that we were able to shut down an entire main street in anticipation of a snowstorm. And we convinced the town to close it and not to like, not to plow the streets. So that was the positive.
Yeah, no doubt. And I guess for you, are you the type of photographer? Do you always have like a project you're working on, or do you kind of give yourself time off, or like what's your kind of artistic process? Because like we were saying, like a lot of your work, you're spending years on it, and it's like these big productions, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not a photographer who's constantly working. That's for sure. I'm like, I think you could probably safely say that like you could divide my working existence into pre-production, production, and post-production, and with time in between all of those. But like the time that we're actually working and shooting is very small.
Yeah.
It's like so in this last An Eclipse of Moths, it was about a year in preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Then we shot over the course of like we're sort of in pre-production for like maybe 2 months, like working with a smaller group. 6 months in production, 6 weeks in production, and then literally like over a year printing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of printing.
Yeah, it's mostly just like compositing different like elements, and and all of that's done here in the studio, and then there's the process of like getting the work in the world, doing the book and exhibitions, and then when that's all over, then you start to like there's a restlessness, and you start to feel like you need to get back to work, and slowly but surely that part of your brain sort of gets back into the process of creating.
Yeah.
So then the cycle begins again.
And I was like looking at your work, and it seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of your work you shoot like in the summer months. I know some of it's winter, but would that be like a fair assessment to like a lot of the work you shoot?
Yeah, for sure. There's practical reasons for that. Like the first and foremost, it's because of the light. Those long nights, long days, I mean, and twilights, because that's the time when we could work with the ambience of the sun and our lights together.
Yeah.
So that's, and then obviously I'm not teaching, and it's just, and then I really enjoy the sort of the landscape at that point. Although there are other times of the year I would love to shoot maybe in the next body of work, so, but that's mainly I would say you're right, the summer, mostly because of the light.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess to go back, like where do you grow up, and like how do you kind of initially get into photography?
Well, I grew up in Park Slope in Brooklyn. My father was a psychoanalyst, and my mom was a dance teacher. I mean, it's a fairly known fact now that my father had his office in the basement of our house.
Okay.
And I used to that was very kind of influential to my work, I think, in terms of like early on. I mean, like I, had early memories of attempting to listen to the sessions, when I was a young boy, putting my ear to the floorboards.
Wow.
And that probably was among my first aesthetic memories, and then I also have a very early memory. It was when I was like 10 years old. My father brought me to the Diane Arbus retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art.
Wow.
And that was the first time that I had a inkling of the power of pictures, and then I didn't really become involved in photography on a serious level until college. So I was at SUNY Purchase, and I had always struggled with academia, dyslexic. The act of taking tests and reading was always very painful for me. So I kind of found myself in a photo class, intro to photo, with Laurie Simmons, the well-known photographer.
Yeah.
And soon as the first picture I ever made, and I saw it in the developer bath, I immediately understood, like, this is a medium I love, and I understand. I think it had a lot to do with just the stillness of it. And I could read it in a way.
So was like your father and your mother, like they were kind of like enjoyed the arts themselves, like, or not so much, or
Not like, we weren't in one of those families that would go to art shows, and I mean, we were part of like definitely my parents were part of like the 60s, like Brooklyn, like kind of generation of like one that's kind of Brooklyn liberal,
yeah.
open-minded kind of. We all went to me and my brother and sister went to open education, like very kind of experimental schools, and but the fact, I don't even know why my father brought me to the Diane Arbus retrospective. It was like not something we did typically.
Yeah.
Now, there's another part of all this, and that is we had a cabin in the woods in Beckett in Massachusetts. I used to go up to like during the summers. And that became very kind of important to us, me, my brother, and my sister. And obviously I was very influenced by that. And from there's a very well-known, probably the most famous movie critic of all time, Pauline Kael, lived in Great Barrington, which is where I live now. And she was a family friend. And that's when I first, I think, really started falling in love with movies.
Okay.
And so from early on, even in my early undergraduate work, and then later, that was the thing I think I really almost unconsciously did, which was try to combine still photography with the kind of production value of movies, light and color and atmosphere. So, and if you trace my work, from the last 30 years, that's in one way or another, that's like what I have done, is bring those worlds together, those sensibilities together.
And what your family like think of you like pursuing a career in photography? Like, were they always kind of supportive of your creative endeavors and like kind of going down this path? Because as you know, it's a crazy road to go down, and there's a lot of ups and downs, and it's not like a direct path to it's a crazy career, as you know.
Yeah, they were always very supportive of what, not only my endeavors, but my brother and my sister and what they wanted to do. They were very supportive of our kind of ambitions, and I mean, it has not been easy and never has been, but yeah, absolutely, for sure, both my parents were equally supportive.
No, that's awesome. And like when you were kind of even just in college, like you're at Purchase, like what kind of stuff were you photographing? Like obviously, like you said, you're inspired by movies, but when you kind of first pick up a camera, like what kind of stuff were you photographing early on?
Well, my very first pictures were all like, actually, I was very interested in like at that, I was in a band,
The
in
Speedies.
the Speedies in the late 70s. And in fact, our big song was Let Me Take Your Photo. So I was still very involved in that music world and the downtown scene and stuff. So my first pictures were actually of like made at CBGBs, and there were a lot of like I became interested in like the whole hardcore scene of like Black Flag and Bad
Wow.
Brains and Minor Threat, and started going to concerts and shooting that. And my one of my earliest pictures was uh, me and my brother went to school with Adam Yauch from the Beastie Boys, and I have a picture of him at the Rat Cage, which was a record company, of him with Adam with a big rat on his head. That's like that picture's still around.
Yeah, I saw it on your Instagram. It's like, yeah, you were like, I took this for my photo one class. I was like, oh man, the stars really aligned there.
It did. And then, Adam and, we remained friends throughout his life. And in fact, that wound up giving that print to Adam later on. But so I had some really pivotal teachers like Laurie Simmons and Jan Groover and some others. And then around that same time, I started taking like film theory classes, and started taking classes on like Hitchcock and the horror films of 1950s and the melodrama. And those that was hugely influential. So I started kind of maybe unconsciously referencing those movies in my pictures, and started making pictures in and around the towns in Beckett.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I really felt like I was connecting to a subject, very.
And like this is the thing I was really interested about, because obviously like I was saying, you have like a lot of these productions are big crews and tons of equipment, like, and it costs a lot of money. Like, how do you make that jump from like shooting just like, like shooting concerts, and then you're like off shooting these big productions? Like, is it like, how do you make that jump? Because there's just so much involved, and like we are saying, there's just a lot of money involved just like producing a shoot like that. How do you kind of even like get into that world, I guess?
Very organically,
Yeah.
slow process, and almost imperceptible, really. But like a very big change happened when I met my director of photography, Rick Sands, who lives in this area. And we started working together. This was around, I guess, this starting with Twilight. And that was like a huge shift in the work, where I started seeing how we could use light in a more choreographed way.
Mm-hmm.
And in those initial pictures, it was very crude in a way. Like we did it with a very small group of people. We rented like from a local theatrical house here, and did it by hook or by crook. We would like tie into people's houses, for electricity, and we just would, use like local landscapers and like this guy who's a tree surgeon, Bill Markham, who we worked with very closely to put lights in his tree lip. So it really started off just like very modestly. And then I would always funnel everything, any kind of like sales I would get, or back into the work, just like, and it slowly but surely grew bigger.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting to hear the process. And like, but before you kind of partnered with Richard Sands, your DP that has been working with you for years, like were you even like? Because I know looking at your work, you guys utilize HMIs a lot.
Yeah.
Were you even in your work prior to that even utilizing those type of lights, or were you just shooting kind of natural light or
No,
strobes
no.
or?
It was with Rick when we started using those kinds of light sources, and you know, and I mean, I think it really opened, and that we've been working so long now that we have this really kind of great relationship where it's almost like, we don't really have to speak much about what the plan is.
Yeah.
When we enter a new body of work, there's some broad strokes about like, I want like these pictures to have a very like, you know, quiet kind of look to them, and less theatrical, this kind of thing. So we like talk about the beforehand. And then once we are up and going, like there isn't a lot we have to say.
Mm. No, that's interesting. And one thing, like once you start to get recognition for your work and people start to notice your work for whatever, do you feel pressure to like stay within one type of style or aesthetic or what you document, or do you still feel like as an artist you have the freedom to do whatever you want? Like,
I think you always, I've always said that every artist has a central story to tell. Just
Mhm.
it's who you are, it's your makeup, it's sort of the sum total of your influences. But within that, you really do work to challenge what your own aesthetic, and do what you can to like push it in different directions. But you never really truly get away from yourself. As much as you try,
Mhm.
um, you know, the pictures reflect something particular about yourself. So um, you but it's important to push it in different directions.
And obviously, since you're doing this as a career, there is a commercial aspect to it. Like, how much time and consideration do you even think about just like, I don't know, like what are galleries going to want? What are collectors going to want? Or do you just blank that out of your mind? Or because it is this weird balance of like art and commerce, and you're trying to make a living and you're trying to sell books and you're trying to figure out like who wants this, I guess.
You can't really think about that, like,
Yeah.
because although like there are realities in terms of getting things made, and there's always like trends out there that like, uh, either you sort of in and out of, but all you have, or all anyone has, is your artwork, and you have to sort of uh, remain true to it,
Yeah.
and try to second guess anything it's going to be inauthentic. And, you know, then why do it? And, you know, there's easier ways to live in this world.
Definitely. And like coming up like early on, like did you kind of always have the confidence in yourself that you would succeed and be able to do this as a career? Or did you ever have times of like doubting yourself, like before like anybody knew who your work was and you're in all these galleries and publishing books? Like, did you kind of always just have that confidence and belief in yourself that you could make it work?
Well, it's that weird combination of like absolute sort of belief in yourself and complete self-doubt at the same time. And that never changes. Like, I can honestly say that happens daily, you know, where you're like, you have like complete ups and downs. And one thing I could honestly say, it never really gets any easier. Like you think it would, but it doesn't. Like getting bodies of work produced, getting them shown, you know, all of that. There's you always have to push and push, you know, even with like galleries and everything. It's like it's it's a myth that like at a certain point, an artist, the idea of just an artist sort of existing in their own world and not having a relation to like the larger world of like the art world is you just, it's, you know, like anything, it's a balance, you know, but like it's, yeah, the problems maybe just become different, but they're still problems.
Yeah, the stakes just change. Like
Yeah.
you get to a point where you get to work on these bigger productions and maybe get a bigger show, but it's all relative pretty much. It's the same stress and it's just more moving parts and juggling all these different things, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. And was like like when you were kind of starting out, like was it always your goal to kind of exhibit your work in galleries and print books, or was there even what was the goal for you, I guess?
But yeah, the goal was always to be like an artist. Like I never really had like a want of being like a commercial photographer or editorial, like, you know, and maybe that's naive or maybe it's just persistence. But like I always wanted to make pictures that reflected my worldview, my story. And I've done very few, if any. So you could count less, you know, than on one hand the any kind of commercial projects that I've done, and I avoided that for a reason, you know, like because like anytime you sort of venture out of your own jurisdiction, your work is no longer sort of serving your artistic vision. It's doing something other than that.
And when you did take those few like commercial jobs, like what made you decide to take them, and did you take anything away from it, I guess, the experience of working on a project like that?
Yeah. So there are like on occasion, like, you know, I'm was very good friends with the members of Yola Tango band that I really admired, and they approached me about using an early, you know, this was many years ago, Twilight picture for the cover, and that in that way I just agreed to like let them use the picture. I didn't make something specifically, but and then I did a campaign once for 6 Feet Under, you know, the HBO show.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah, only because like I really liked it
Yeah.
and saw that as an interesting challenge, and even that was difficult for me to do. And then, you know, you know, I did a editorial sort of collaboration with the New York Times Magazine where I worked with like more well-known actors, the Dreamhouse Pictures. but these are rarities, and I've exceptions to the rule, I guess.
Is it?
There's always an exception to any rule,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Is it like because I come like most of the work I do is like editorial work, and that's kind of
Yeah.
work I do, and I've never really delved into the like gallery space or anything like that. Do you think galleries in that world kind of frowns upon artists doing commercial work, or because I know I interviewed Todd Hido, and he has an interesting approach. Like he does shoot commercial work, but he doesn't post it on his website. Like if you go to his website or his Instagram, it's all just his own thing, pretty much.
I don't think there's any hard and fast rules. There are
Yeah.
certain artists who do a lot of editorial,
Yeah.
who are very successful in the art world and who are able to manage both things.
Yeah.
And actually, there's artists whose work feed off those things. But one thing for me is this: it's practical. It's like the expense of making my pictures is so high that very few people will do it anyway. So like,
Yeah.
So it just doesn't make sense, on an economic level, it's on so many different levels, so.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And like I know looking at your work, I've grown up in Massachusetts, so I know the areas like Great Barrington, been going there for years, and a lot of your work is based around there. What kind of keeps you going back there? And like do you ever feel like I know some of your work, I think you went to Rome and did a project out there, but what kind of makes you keep kind of going back to like the Berkshire area?
Well, actually, I live here now. I live in
Yeah.
Great Barrington. I feel like artists have like their territories.
Mm-hmm.
Some photographers, particularly like Rome, they move. They're like travelers, and then there are others who just like respond to a particular landscape or setting, and that's what like for me. I've always been drawn to work over and over again in the same place and go deeper rather than wider. It's also, again, talking about the practicalities. It's much easier to work in a place that you're a known figure.
Mm-hmm.
So I could go to like the mayor or like fire department or police department. We could ask to close down streets and wet down streets or whatever it is. And I'm not a stranger. I'm like someone who's like been here long term, and I think that it's just easier to work.
Yeah, definitely. And you putting some money back in that local economy, man. That don't hurt either. That's
Yeah.
that's a good thing. And have you kind of seen it change a lot? This from you've been going there for decades. Has it kind of changed? And like, have the areas you kind of you're drawn to within the Berkshires changed over the years? You think?
Things change all the time.
Yeah.
Literally, like from like week to week, because even when I'm not working, I do continue to like location scout and
Yeah.
at different areas, and like even small changes and big changes. And certainly there's been huge changes since I began working here many years ago.
Yeah.
But that's really part of it. Really, it's just like the world is in constant flux.
No, definitely. And one project I was interested in talking to you about was uh Cathedral of the Pines. What was kind of your goal with that project? Because it sounded pretty interesting. I think you ended up when you made that work, you were like living in a church for like a year, right?
Yeah, I still live in a church, actually.
Wow, that's how did yeah. Before we get into like, how do you end up living in a church? I didn't even like that. That's an interesting thing.
Well, I was living in New York, and at the end of my marriage, about 10, over 10 years ago,
Yeah.
I decided to move back to Great Barrington, and it was my cameraman's ex-girlfriend lived in the church, and she rented it to me.
Mm.
And as soon as I walked in, I knew like this is like feels like home in a certain way. There was also a secondary building, which I'm in right now, which was a former firehouse,
Wow.
which is right next door. And I sort of immediately saw like I could work, live situation here. And it's really worked out really nicely. And then Cathedral of the Pines was a series of pictures I made in Beckett, where my family house was, even though it's so long time ago. But that same, it's not really, it's a small town. It's mostly woodland.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make pictures that were directly related to nature and really intimate and sort of smaller scale. And that's that. So, and the title in that work came from I'm a cross country skier, and the place we, my partner and I, Joanne, was skiing. There was a trail called Cathedral of the Pines, and that's how that title came.
And with some of the work, I noticed some of it is nudes. How do you kind of decide when you're gonna when it's gonna be a nude subject versus not? Like, and what's the kind of the choice behind that? I guess.
Well, those pictures in general were very much about like nature and like certain intimacy and nakedness,
Mm-hmm.
and that was definitely like a sub theme of that work. And then in the next, the most recent body of work, An Eclipse of Moss, I went directly in opposition to those pictures. They're more in like cityscapes. They're kind of larger scale. There's smaller figures. It's much more removed, and so that's an example of like going from one body of work to another, where you like very consciously want to push away from the previous pictures to make the new pictures, but at the same time, there's a core similarity in tone. And
Yeah, definitely. And looking at the work, like I know you do utilize Photoshop, and you also do like compositing stuff. And with the recent project, like how far will you guys go with the Photoshop? Like the one photo I'm looking at is the man standing in the parking lot, and it says like Redemption Center. Like, or is that all like the Redemption Center? Is that like the letters that's just on the wall naturally, or will you guys kind of utilize Photoshop and add like stuff like that, I guess?
so that was an actual Redemption Center.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the basis for the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
But it just said Redemption Center over the door. And so I had my graphic artist. We actually got permission and sort of wrote the sign, the big letters, block letters on the side of the building,
Oh,
Redemption
wow.
Center, and then aged it down, and it's still there.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah,
And like looking at your work, I know you kind of um you spend a lot of time on like location scouting. Like
yeah.
what's the process behind location scouting, and like how do you kind of finally make the decision, like, all right, we're gonna shoot at this location?
Well, it happens months before we start shooting,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just myself driving around looking.
Mm-hmm.
It's very like at the core. It's like very core photographic of like the lone photographer wandering. And I just go to these spots and I'm looking for something that feels like familiar, but also outside of time, formally interesting, um, and that I could accommodate one of my stories. That's what I'm looking for. And that starts the process once we find that, and I find about 10 of them, 15, 20. And then I start working with my partner, Joanne. We write descriptions for each picture.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go into production over a period of time and make those pictures.
And the description, because I it's really, you posted one on your Instagram story, and you get to see a little bit of it. It's almost like, yeah, like a script. And is that just more for the crew or the DP or just the actors, or what is the script? What is the use behind that, I guess?
It's for all of us. It's
Yeah.
like a guidepost for like, you know, it's definitely to help the director of photography and the location manager and the art person, everyone else who's involved. They have this as like a storyboard, basically. It's a, and it also helps the when we cast, so everyone's on the same page, and I also, and even for me, like it helps me kind of visualize the picture.
Yeah.
So
And with casting, are you mostly casting people that live within the Great Barrington area or wherever you're shooting, or do you fly? Yeah.
in this last body of work, it was basically people from the neighborhoods that we look for and beforehand, like always like keeping an eye out like for people who we think could work well in the pictures. And so it's a casting process, but through local people.
Is there like a lot of like returning characters, or do you kind of just shoot someone once and just kind of move on?
I rarely use people more than once, like on occasion, but like mostly uh, it's it's just each person is like really used just for one particular picture.
Yeah. And you know, have you always been comfortable just kind of running this ship? Like, because at the end of the day, you're the guy running the ship. Everyone's looking to you for the answer of what you want to do. Like when you first started doing these big productions, was it just kind of a learning curve and just trying to figure out like how to successfully navigate one of these big productions? Did it kind of take you a while, you think?
Yeah, I always feel comfortable. Like mainly, I know I have the image in my head, and I like feel like all of us need to work together to create that, and I need to navigate that in one way or another,
Mhm.
But my director of photography takes a lot of the um, leadership role in terms of working with his team, that they all kind of work directly through him. And so like, no one's, will ask me questions directly when they're working for him. And
Mhm.
then, so there's certain ways of like channeling information, but we're all sort of working to create this perfect moment together. That's what it's all about.
And with your DP, when you guys are just figuring out lighting, is it um are you coming to him with like examples? Like I know you said you kind of get inspired by movies a lot. Is it like you're kind of putting a mood board together and then you guys kind of bounce ideas off, or how do you kind of direct the lighting aspect because it's such a big part of what you
Yeah,
do?
we used to do that, but now we're just like the mood board is the previous pictures in a way, like, and it's more like conversational. Like I want these pictures to feel this, and it and I think a lot of it has been like trying to quiet down the aesthetic, because we've kind of proven that we could do these big operatic theatrical pictures. What's more challenging to me now is like to make a quieter, sort of more subtle approach, and certainly that was the case in these last pictures.
Yeah, because like looking at the recent project, it's like I'm looking at the Redemption Center photo again. It's it almost I don't know, it almost just looks like natural light. I'm
Yeah,
sure you're lighting some of it. I don't know if you are, but yeah, it
yeah, we
is.
are. We're doing a lot, but
Oh,
like it's very. There's still lights in, lifts very high up. There's like lights in the stores.
mm-hmm,
But it's intentionally much more quiet.
mm-hmm.
Like it should feel. It's a kind of there's a there's a certain kind of realism to the new pictures that I think really interests me.
Yeah, and I know looking at your work, a lot of times you shoot on location, obviously, but other times you guys have gone to like sound stages and built sets. Like, when do you decide like when you're gonna go location versus set, and like, is there a different workflow, I guess, just to kind of put using a sound stage, I guess?
Yeah, so for Beneath the Roses, which is still by far my most epic body of work, um, there were 8 productions in that, and there were 4 exterior productions and 4 soundstage productions over the course of like 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we primarily, those interiors are all on the soundstage, and there's a very different workflow because you're controlling every element of it. So you're creating the spaces, you're creating like the the wallpaper and the props and all of that, and you're not really dealing with any outside circumstances except trying to create this world of the picture.
Yeah, and I would imagine the challenge is almost like when you're shooting on location and then you're trying to like create something on the sound stage, but all make it look cohesive so it doesn't look like, oh, that's like a set.
Yeah.
That's got to be the difficult part, like all the details and props and all that stuff to make it all look cohesive and not like stand out, I guess.
Yeah, you want it all to be part of one world.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah, definitely.
That's why we do a lot to like age down things and make them feel old, and like, and also do a lot of like, doorways and different kind of framing devices to create like complication in those spaces.
I guess to wrap up, I guess like you've accomplished a lot, and you know, what kind of drives you now, and like I guess what kind of keeps you going, and what kind of keeps you interested in photography, I guess.
You just need to feel like you're working towards finding what the story means,
Mm-hmm.
that as I said earlier, it's like the problems never really change. Whenever you make the next picture, you're dealing with like a formal issue. You're dealing with like how things look in the frame.
Yeah.
Dealing with light and color. They're all like formal. It's like a math problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you hope that the pictures will connect and make sense. And every time you finish a body of work, then the next body of work happens. It's like there's a lot of in between time, and there's a lot of like busy work, but in the end, that's the thing that pushes you always.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Gregory, man, I can't thank you enough. Been a big fan of your work for years, so it was a real pleasure talking to you, man. And looking forward to seeing some more great work coming out of my home state in Massachusetts. So I can't thank you enough for your time, man.
It's my pleasure, and thanks for the really interesting questions.
Yeah, I tried my best. Hopefully it was great. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Take care, Gregory. Bye. So there you have it. That was the Gregory Crewdson interview. Just want to thank Gregory so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. It was a really pleasure talking to him about his journey with photography and how he kind of approaches his massive productions. The stuff he does is truly incredible, and his like I said, his storytelling ability. There's really just nothing like it. So I can't thank him enough. Definitely go give Gregory a follow on Instagram at Crewdson Studio. I'll put the link in the description, but he's got lots of cool work up there, and definitely go check that out. They're always updating. And as well, he's got a cool documentary about him. It's available on Apple and I believe Amazon Prime, called Gregory Crewdson Brief Encounters. It's this kind of documentary that kind of shows behind the scenes of his process and how they kind of put together some of these productions. Really cool documentary, so definitely go check that out. And as always, I'll be having weekly podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as the Photo Banter YouTube page. So definitely go check that out and hit the subscribe button. And as always, thanks so much for listening, and take care.